They'll be calling you a radical. This is a great place to do a video here. We're in Shadow Valley, Utah, where I pretty well grew up as the plaster, as a young kid, this hallowed, sacred, incredible ground. And I was just talking to, a friend here, and she says, well, the Shoshone, I said, you're the only person, she's older than me, that they call themselves Shoshone, not Shoshone. And so this is a historic, important video because the World Health Organization is coming out and confirming that COVID has come from seafood, which is my hypothesis. So down the Birch Creek, this hallowed native sacred ground that I grew up on, which McKay Hospital, which Glassman Pond, I started plastering in here when I was 15 years old. I worked on all these houses. The brick houses when they first started developing here in Shadow Valley, those are brick. That's brick from the Ogden Mall when they tore it down in the late 70s. But so the developer, everybody knew what hallowed sacred ground this was. So, that's why all the streets are named native. This was Shoshone ground, and really historic. There's a lot of spirits here, I'm telling you. So I was working right there down at the bottom. I was working all the way down at the bottom on an old post. I was working on Randy Richards' house. The ponds, the two big ponds that were up here. Then I would come up and I would go up to the top. I was working up there at the top of the creek when I got cancer, when I got sick. It hit me. And so I stuccoed dozens and dozens of these houses. I own Blanche Plastering. But I got sick in 2011. And so I talk a lot about this sacred ground because the D Event Center is built on that hallowed ground. It's such a spiritual place. It always has been such a spiritual place. I know a lot about the native history, the real native history. There was a bounty house on 25th Street. So my family got here in 1822. They were guides. Ike Potter, Abraham Hunsaker came with, that's my lines, but they came later. They came here to rape the fur. John Weaver said in his journal, Jim Bridger said in his journal, there's more fur right here. So right here in Shadow Valley, it's the angle of the sun. Sits here, it's the biggest mule deer, just spectacular. So this was a very sacred place to the Shoshone. You go to the burial ground up there, the Lindquist Cemetery, there's natives buried there. The West Weaver Cemetery when Chief Cherokee was killed, but they name them after the native lines here for a reason. I used to work for George Pappas. I worked for that piece of shit. I won't even mention his name. But I owned Blanche Plaster for all those years. I got hundreds of stories here. When you come to Shadow Valley, you'll see a cement stucco job that was done like in 82, 81. It's flawless, perfect. That's me. All my, cement, I would never switch to the fake stuff. This is where I was working when I got sick. And so, but I think it's important because that's where I was at when I got sick, and we're all these years later, and a lot of people got sick right here. I know 5 different people in Shadow Valley that got leukemia at the same time. We know the plume from Fukushima, the mapping shows, came right here. Right here. We're at the top of this hallowed sacred Wasatch. But what happened here? The early settlers, they weren't murderers. They tried to live in symphony, whatever. But it was after the war, after the Civil War in the 1860s, and the fur traders come out here. The French were in here robbing the fur. Jedediah Smith, Jim Bridger. This was going to be called Bridger. This was going to, it's called Brownsville, blah, 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 blah. But it was when they came through that we call them the Christian Wars. They didn't just happen in California. It happened here. They set up bounty houses, $25 for a child's ear, $50 for a woman's, $100 for a man's. And these were the Civil War. Jesse James lived on 25th Street right there. I'll tell you the greatest thing. I call Ogden blood, and I say it's so Freudian. I knew Fawn McKay Brody personally. I'll tell you how Freudian is. Jack Dempsey lived on 25th Street. You know where he met his wife? In the brothel. And so they lived here all those years. But when the scouts came across here, they mass murdered these natives. Right here. Right here. These streets are named. Now my mom was a teacher at the Intermountain Indian School. I should have written a book about that. Darren Perry's not going to tell you this. We were just talking about Mr. Hamilton, but I was a little boy when all this native culture, my grandmother, the historian, Ella Potter Hunsaker's my grandma, Ike's, Weaver Canyon. This spiritual, beautiful, incredible piece of landscape here Shadow Valley. The Shadow Valley word was taken from the Shoshone. That's what they called it. Utah, top of the mountain. That's a Utah word. It's slang. Idaho, slang for that's Blackfoot. You know, we were just having a good conversation about the Bannock County, which after Ike Potter was murdered at Echo, they went up there to Lava, Idaho. And that's Peter Skeen Ogden never set foot in this town. It was called Brownsville. Brown was a crook. You know, so they were going to name it after Jim Bridger. Bridger was married to the native. Wasatch means French for hide, right? The French were in here, you know, raping the fur, robbing, pillaging. But it was in '63. The Mormons tried to live in Symphony Wall Avenue, you know, the skirmish when Stewart killed Chief Cherokee and shot him in the head. There's a monument. My grandma got it put up, the Daughters of Utah Pioneers, by the Harrisville Church. Stewart said he was trying to prove Chief Cherokee just smoked the peace pipe with Lauren Farr, the first mayor. And Stewart murdered him, shot him in the head on his horse, and said, oh, I was trying to prove the thesis when Jim Bridger said, I'll give Brigham Young $1,000 for the first bushel of corn you can grow on in Salt Lake. You know, when Captain Hastings tricked them and they went through immigration, when Hastings was a liar, you know, he told them to come down Echo, you know, take the old trail because they were behind the Donner Party. He knew what was going to happen. So he said he was trying to prove that thesis. So they revolted, which is the Blanche line. He's the first one. You take our elder. Ralph Blanche got an arrow through his heart. You know, buried right here on this ancient freaking sacred ground right next to my dad. So, who was killed by the nuclear industry. You know, so then Wattis lived right there. Right here. Which is the Bybee line, which Utah construction evolved from that. They built all the nuclear industry. That's what built this city up later. But the natives right here in Shadow Valley were murdered, slaughtered. You know, I used to always say I had this little angel that used to come to me right where the event center is now. That's all you can hear this thing. So I grew up there. I was there my whole life. You know, the heart surgery say everybody, that's my uncle who was always mad at me, my family. I always had that angel with me, and I remember when I was dying of cancer and leukemia, I was in LDS. Vincent Hansen saved me. I've known Vincent since I was a kid. I remember I was having the PET scan. The girl says, put yourself in your happy place. I says, I'm in my happy place. I'm a Glassman Pond, skinny dipping with these girls. When the chemo worm arc valve and they pulled the hose out of my chest, the girl that I was skinny dipping the pond pulled it out. She says, I haven't seen you in years, Kevin. 30 years. I was like, whoa. But I told Vincent, I'll never forget this. Danish philosophy, something brought in New Denmark, I call Utah. I says, Vincent, I had a dream. I had this utopic dream, and I had this angel, this little native girl angel, and she comes to me all the time. I first met her right here in my dreams when I was a little boy. And I says, she always talks to me, and she's always there with me. And she says, they murdered my mom and dad. They murdered my mom and dad. They murdered my grandpa and grandma. These weren't the Mormons, Connors, and crew. This was the United States military. Come in here and just murder these people. And she's always been with me. So I went into a coma in the bone marrow transplant. I was dying. I had no chance. And I went into a coma, and I went out. And I woke up, and the nurses were crying. They're like, I can't believe you came back. You were out so long. And I remember, they said, and they quizzed me. The doctors quizzed me about what I saw, you know, the light, the brown. I says, I remember, all I remember is this. She came to me and says, it's okay, Kevin. It's okay. Let go. Let go. Stop fighting. Stop fighting. It's okay. I'm here with you. And I woke up and I was okay. I didn't cry at anything, and then I survived. But this sacred ground, and I love it how all the streets are named. I stuck out all these. I remember I did the house up there for Gooch. 30 years ago, it's flawless. They didn't pay me. They says, you know, just took me through court. A nightmare. But, I mean, I'll tell you a great story. There's a viral video that's got 65,000 views right before I'm up there fixing this nightmare right up here at the top of the Birch Creek. And I list his name and everything. Tore that molded up nightmare apart. And you can look at the video. It's got 65,000 views. This is how psycho these people are. He stiffed me. This is right before I got leukemia. I'm dying of leukemia, and everybody knows my story because of my YouTube site. You know, I'm in the bone marrow trying just dying. Everybody thinks I'm dying. The dude, about 2 years later, sent me a friend request. And I'm like, dude, do you know who I am? Oh, no, a friend of mine says he watches you on YouTube, blah, blah. You're the one that stiffed me, you piece of shit. You know? Oh, you know, and he disappeared. So anyway, this sacred place, I think it's irony they're named after all these tribes, rightfully so, but it's a grand piece of real estate. You know, you get into the bottom of them now, they've just commercialized it. It's gross. There used to be this little market right down here. I used to call it the hippie market. You know, and these two dudes, they were true beatniks, ran it when we were 15, 16. You know, this is Ogden. Everything went on here. You know, the sexual revolution. Consensual sex was 14 years old. I went to Walkwest Junior High. Half the 8th grade was pregnant. 35-year-old rich guys picking them up. I mean, this place was crazy. I called it Blood, Ogden. You know, it was the wildest ass thing. We'd buy our kegs, and we'd have our kegs up the Perch Creek, you know, all over this freaking grand area. But the deer, the cougars, the animals that were in here would take your breath away. Not that long ago. You know, from the Weber State University, which was built in 1950, this way, there was nothing. It was all just native, pristine ground, you know, and the animals that were here, people would deer hunt here, you know, but so it's got a sacred feel about it and what they've done, you know, the people. I still got dozens and dozens and dozens that went on Blanche plastering, and you know, I refuse to switch to the fake shit. There's a great video of me stuck in this house way down when I was really, really young, and I got plastered all over me. Right on Shadow Valley Drive, one of the first houses. But it's important because this is right where I was at when I got cancer, and I was given 2 months to live. Doctor looks at you and it's over. You know, I spent a lot of time in the bone marrow transplant. My family, Vincent Hansen, Thimble Peterson. So today the world, and I've been in Geneva. I fight with the World Health Organization, and I've been a lot in Vienna. So they come out, and my hypothesis on Fukushima, it's going to make the Great Salt Lake dry, it's going to cause fires, it's going to genocide the Pacific Ocean. Everything I said come true. The cancer, I know 5 people right here in Shadow Valley got cancer at the same time I did. You know, 3 of the 5 are dead. The little girl, my granddaughter's friend's alive. You know, you're in denial. You know, Fukushima, the Great. So now the World Health Organization says today that they're confirming it came from frozen seafood. Just what Kevin Blanche said all those years ago. It's going to mutate. It's going to move, you know. So stay tuned. I wanted to get some history up of, you know, Shadow Valley. You know, the brick that's on these colored brick originally on these houses in the 70s, all from the Ogden Mall. You know, when they tore them. Now, I worked on all these houses. You know, I plastered the foundations. I watched this whole thing evolve in this native ground. But make no mistake about it. The natives that lived here, the Shoshone, which they call me So Goya, not Darren Perry. I'm not, you know, I like Darren, but thank you, Bear River Mouse. Don't even get me going. The truth of the matter is, in the 1860s and the 70s, right here where we're standing, they came in and murdered them. Now, a lot of the kids, it's called Spanish Fork, and they got Little Soldier's Child. That's why it's called Spanish Fork. He's buried in the West Weber Cemetery, and the ancient burial ground. So, they murdered them. They would kidnap their kids and take them to Europe and sell them into slavery, you know, to be maids and housemaids. But the women and men, they murdered them, just plain ass murdered them. Make no mistake about it. Ogden, you know, William Glass, you know, his head ripped off. I can take you to the cemetery right over here, and I can show you 3 different people's markers killed by a bear. There were lots of bears right here when I was a boy. I mean, elk, mule deer, native spirits. Oh, they're still here. And I hang on to them, and she's with me you know, she's with me right now. Always been with me. Always with me. Stay tuned.